of the most important things to do with detections is not rely on an individual detection. I think it's really critical that you have the ability, that the platform has the ability to correlate. So if you take a sequence of events and you create a narrative around that sequence of events, that will give you a far better picture that it is something worth spending time on versus not.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of ZeroToExit. This is Neelima and Ankur. Happy New Year everybody. Hope you all had a fun and relaxing holiday break. We took a bit of a hiatus from the show to get ready for our second season. We were busy lining up the best in the business. And to that, I couldn't be more delighted to kick off our second season with Hitesh Sheth as our guest. Hitesh is the CEO of Vectra, a leader in the threat detection and response for cloud and data center workloads. Vectra was founded in 2011 to leverage AI and ML to detect network threats and has since seen a phenomenal growth in the business. In this episode, we'll talk about security, state of the public and private markets, the great resignation, and above all, great product and company building. Hitesh takes a no-holds-barred approach in his interviews, so you won't want to miss this episode. Hi Hitesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Neelima and Ankur. It's a real pleasure. I appreciate your kicking off this next season with me. Happy New Year to all your listeners and to both of you as well. I'm looking forward to the conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Hitesh. Are you a New Year resolution kind of guy? And if so, do you have any personal goals for this year?
I'm actually not. I think I tend to find most people, when they do these resolutions, tend to be fairly futile. Consistency on goals year on year is better than cooking up brand new ones every single year. It's like the fitness thing. Like you wake up on January 1 and gym membership shoot up for a while and then they plummet on February 1. Like, what's the point? Right? No. So I don't do New Year's goals. I definitely have goals that are fairly consistent that go on year to year. And I'd rather stick with those.
Yeah,
and
as
some
they
of
say.
those are?
One is there's a whole bunch of vector oriented stuff that I'm pretty fixated on. But the other one, this is sort of like work in progress perpetually. As you make progress in your career, is one of the things that you really try to find is some kind of balance. And if my family was listening to this right now, they'll probably chuckle and say, he's got a long way to go. And they'd be right. But honestly, it is one of those things that is important, that as you build your career out and if you're building a business out or whatever it is, there's a continuous learning around how do you achieve better balance. And I'll confess and tell you right now that I indeed have a long way to go.
Awesome. So here's to hoping that you find that balance in 2022. I'll go towards a little bit about your founding journey, right? You
Sure.
started Vectra 10 years ago, and we've often heard you in your interviews saying great product and company building is often a grind, right? Like it shows 10 years, same company and awesome growth. How do you maintain your mojo year after year?
It comes down to why you do something like this in the first place. I'm assuming you're going to have people who are either have started companies or are aspiring to start companies on this podcast. I'll tell you what doesn't work. If you're looking to start something because you're fixated on some kind of economic outcome in a short period of time, don't do it. Don't do it, because the chance, or you could get lucky and you could make a lot of money and you'll feel happy and you think you've done a lot. The truth is the chances are you're going to fail. So it comes down first and foremost to why you do this. And in my case, I was very passionate about the application of AI to network security. It started with that. That was number one. The second thing I was very, very passionate about was building a company with a great culture, right? And, having had large roles at multiple companies, you realize, and I'm sure you too realize it where you are right now, you inherit the culture. You are sort of like, you really can't do a whole lot. You can try and improve it at the edges, but you really can't do a whole lot at the core of it. And there were a lot of lessons learned along the way of things that work really well and things that really just are miserably awful. And so how do you avoid that and really build something that you can look back and go, okay, not only did we make a dent in the universe in a positive way from a business point of view, but you build something that you can look back and say, okay, you know what? That really was the best time of my life. No matter where you are in a company, if you can achieve that, then for me, that is super fulfilling. And that does not happen overnight. Those things don't happen overnight. And that takes a while to get through. And so you've got to have that stamina and persistence to do it.
I have often struggled with this myself, and I'd love to get your perspective. Regardless of the economic outcome, and you're right, like that's gonna burn you out. But after 4 or 5 years into a product and company, you kind of lose that zest sometimes. How do you reload your gun every year? Like, is it the business goal? Is it that cultural change? Is it you becoming a better CEO as your goal kind of gets you going, amps you up, get ready for the year? Or you let a couple of weeks elapse and it's just business as usual? You got to go through the grind all over again kind of thing.
In my case, it is not the 4 or 5 year thing that it's not the time horizon that's really the thing that I think about. In any company, you go through, great periods and you go through really tough periods, right? And it's the when you hit the 4 or 5 year mark and it's really tough, that's when you really sit down and kind of go like, what the heck am I doing? Like, why am I going about doing this and all? And look, the two of you, and I suspect there are many people on this call. If you're an immigrant, I like to think you have some degree of stamina built into you already, right? You're otherwise who leaves everything where you come from and lands somewhere, and regardless of what economic background you came from, there's a level playing field that occurs here when you come to here to the US, which is one of the best things of being here. But the thing for us, for me in particular, I derive a ton of energy from customers. As we've gone through and we have had our share of, call it, dark periods as a company, the thing I come back to is again, why did I start this in the first place? Why did I get involved into something like this? And when you're going through a rough patch, sitting with customers who are close to you is very energizing, because they're going to tell you, well, certainly what is wrong, but if you've done a good job in building relationships, right, you're going to learn a lot about what is right. And and keeping a perspective on what is right in that period becomes really essential. And I think that gives you a way to power through the tough period. The other thing I'll tell you is, it is so critical that you have a set of advisors, board members around you who have the ability to take the long view. When you are in the middle of a crisis period, right, which is usually what you're talking about, like how do you lose your mojo, so to speak, that's really when you lose your mojo the most. If you've got board members and investors and advisors whose thing is, hey, you know what, the best thing is to just get out and sell. Find the first route, first off ramp, and do it. Sometimes they'll be right. In fairness, sometimes they'll be right. Okay, but if they are balanced about taking the long view, that really helps you out. So in our case, right, when we've had 1 or 2 episodes like that, I had a couple of advisors who are like, you know what, you should just sell. I mean, it'd be great. Go and find somebody who's going to give you a bunch of money. Let us get some of our money back, and you'll be good to go. But then I had other people around me who could take a very long view, right, about this. I'll give a name out. So Vinod Khosla at KV, if he ever ends up listening to this, he will not mind my saying this. He is a very tough guy to work with, but it's precisely why he's a great guy to work with. He absolutely takes a long view. And it's not just Vinod. I've got other people at the table as well around me. Charlie Giancarlo, Eric Wolford, I can keep going. Who have been, Brad Gillespie, who was one of my earliest investors. They can take a long view, and that really helps you. So it's not just what you do, it's the people you surround yourself with that makes a difference. And the last thing I'll tell you is this: inside your company, if either you decide to go become a CEO, have a couple of people who are constants that you can really count on in your journey. Okay, the reality is you won't be able to have 15, 20 people. If you're lucky, if you have 4, 5, 6 people, even 2 people for that matter, right, who have the stamina the same way you do, that is really essential to really go the long haul on something like this.
So you feed off of each other's your highs and lows, so to speak.
Highs. You don't want to
Highs.
feed off the lows.
Well, yeah.
But it's the highs really that make it. And but more important than just feeding off highs, it's
Hmm.
having the perspective that this is indeed a journey, and it just doesn't happen overnight. There's a tiny percentage of startups, where you could be an idiot and you can stumble into a market and you could do well no matter how good you are. But for the majority of the people out there, it is indeed a grind.
A minor follow-up on that one, Nitesh. Looks like you had some founding principles and you sort of went through those. Is this fair to say that you should have like good time founding principles and wartime founding principles, because you tend to see that over 10 years?
I don't think so. I think being really clear about your core values very
Okay.
early on is really essential. And your next question is likely going to be, so what are your values and what do you guys focus on, right? So I would say, if you're lucky to have you, join Vectra tomorrow. So that's by the way, on the can I say this on the podcast? I'm making a job offer right now
Of course,
to
of
both of you.
course. all,
Okay,
all,
so
all fair game.
right. So put that aside. That's table stakes stuff. The three things that we care about the most, right, at Vectra are number one, putting the customer first. We are obsessive about this. I am personally obsessive about it. So what does that really mean? Any reasonably smart individual should say put the customer first. In this case, do you have a culture that has got genuine empathy for the customer success? Is that pretty consistent across the entire company? And the reason that's important is then you don't have a culture where it is, putting it simply, it's either product first or sales first. And you see a lot of that. And I, in my time before Vectra, I saw that was one of the things that really pained me the most, which is I've been in very great companies where, depending on what business you're in, right, it was a product culture or it was a sales culture. Rarely is it a marketing culture or or a finance culture. Sometimes if you're a shitty company, then it's a finance culture. But product and sales, you tend to have a lot of conflict. How do you eliminate that and really kind of go everybody's aligned in the interest of the customer? That's number one. Number two is no drama teamwork, in those exact words. And the place where this matters the most is with executive team, where in most companies they tend to be the biggest offenders of this maxim. And so what is key to achieving something like no drama teamwork? One of the essential elements is, if you and I were having, either of you, the three of us are having a debate about something, and we were on completely opposite ends of the spectrum of what we think the right answer is. But if you assume positive intent from the outset, that look, at the end of the day, we are serving the customer. It's coming back to the customer first thing. This is in the interest of achieving customer success, right? 9.9 out of 10 times, if you are really authentic about the positive intent, you will land at the right answer. But on the other hand, if you don't, then it's the fastest path to having a ton of drama in the company. So no drama teamwork. Third is integrity. That's it. Those are the three. Remember, you're already smart, good looking, hardworking. So
Love
Awesome.
those, nice and simple. The last thing on this particular thread is, as you address your teams, whether it's your end of year, newsletter, your quarterly all hands, employees who have stuck with you for many, many years, are you always repeating these messages over and over again? And how do you balance that where the employees are like, okay, here we go, Hitesh again, same three things, versus keeping your message fresh, new? There's something new. How do you ensure that the vitality within the organization is maintained, where like every year some of the folks who have stayed with you for longer feel like, hey, there's something new to look forward to?
yeah, look, I think there are a couple of things here. One is not just every year, every quarter. Hopefully, you're talking about material growth in the business.
Yeah.
You're talking about new areas that you're expanded into, new things that you have done. So I mean, that's like company wide, right? You got to kind of put that out there and be very communicative. There's a message that I put out every quarter to the company that lays out the accomplishments for every part of the company. It's not just like, hey, we achieved these numbers and it was great and these were like these great customers, but I think you want to highlight, okay, yes, the obvious ones. What did the product team achieve? What did the marketing team achieve? But
Hmm.
what did the finance team achieve? What did HR
Yeah.
achieve? What did the legal team achieve? And that highlighting what I would essentially call the glue of the company becomes really important because it ties everybody together and you have a better appreciation for what it takes to actually be successful as an entire company. That's one. But to your point about the people who've been here the longest, I tend to have direct sessions with them. People who've been here 4+ years in a separate group, because they've got a long perspective, and you want to sit down and have a very open dialogue on a regular cadence and to get their perspective. I could be living in my bubble because they've been here. There's a high degree of trust, and they're already invested in the company. They have full permission to pop my bubble any time they want to.
Yeah.
Right? But you got to engage them at that level and take their feedback and act on it. It's hard to do. It's
Yeah.
hard to maintain the discipline to do that well. But if you do that, there's a relationship aspect of that that allows people to kind of ride forward over a course of time,
Hmm.
right? And that is super critical. If you, again, authentically invest in the relationship with the people you've got in the company, and the people who are sticking with you the longest, that in itself creates energy for people to be there with you as you go from year to year.
I really like that perspective. Actually, we recently did a celebration of our folks who had been with the company for 10 years. It was the first time I saw it. Obviously, doing so on a more regular cadence, I think, goes a long way in retaining them.
You got to have a culture where those folks feel like they have a direct line to you anytime.
Yeah.
And they can amplify your message, right? Like that's, I think
Yeah,
that's
that's a good
Correct.
one.
But
one
they
of
will
the,
only amplify it if they have a direct line to you, if
yes.
you're listening to them, if they can pop your bubble periodically if they need to, right? All that's got to be really real for them to kind of say, okay, you know what, I'm going to go and amplify the things, that are really positive, but you got to have that open communication chain and the relationship, most importantly.
Yeah. I just wanted to switch the gears a little bit and geek out a little bit more on security because a lot of our listeners are security as well. So, one of the things that you've often said in your talks is that kind of prevention in security is fool's errand, and that bad guys are going to break through your preventative controls anyways,
Yeah.
and that detection is the kind of the holy grail, if you will. And just for our listeners, prevention is just like, hey, having some sort of a security preventative control to not even let the bad guys in, versus detection is if the bad guys in detecting. Tell us more about it.
One small point of clarification. I think prevention is something any customer should try and do that. It becomes a fool's errand if you think that's the only way you're going to deal with security and so like the latest brand of cyber attacks. The reason for that statement, and I think today, I don't think I've met a single CISO in the last 24 months who would disagree with the notion that you cannot, I mean, it'd be crazy to rely on prevention as the only mechanism. I think there's enough evidence out there. We all know this. There's a new attacker variant, something. It's like COVID. It happens on a pretty frequent basis. The infrastructure reality, the attack surface is morphing at an exponential rate. And for prevention to work, you need to have a static attack surface. And that is just not the case. If you look at something like the cloud as an example, okay, cloud is like Windows, is circa Windows 95
Yeah,
times 1,000.
it's wild, wild west. Yeah.
Okay, and you could argue Windows 95 created the security industry. I think the cloud is going to sustain it quite thoroughly.
Thank God
But the
for that.
reality is,
We'll have jobs.
yeah, everyone's going to have jobs for a long time to come. The reality is that the attack surface is morphing so fast. It's an n by n permutational problem. There is no way you're going to solve it. Now, look at it on the flip side. Let's take something fairly narrow, like network security. Okay, when you're dealing with the notion of detection and response, the network stack is 7 layers. It's been 7 layers for a very long time. It's not changing. The OSI stack is not going to add an eighth layer ever. So therefore, in terms of if you think contained problems versus uncontained problems to solve, this is a contained problem. When you're dealing with how do you deal with somebody as they're navigating the 7 layers, that's a contained problem. On the way in, it's an uncontained problem. So therefore, yes, try and stop it the best you can. It's a smart thing to do, right? But for God's sake, don't rely on that because you'll get killed. And there's enough evidence to tell you that yes, you're guaranteed 100% to get killed if that's what you're going to rely on.
The one thing related to detection though is then there is this concept of noise, right? Like as you start detecting, it's very hard to really know what is like good detection versus
Yeah,
not. And Vectra says that you guys do true AI in detection and
sure,
response.
sure.
So two related questions there. One, we hear a lot of hype around AI, ML
Mhm.
in security products. Like, what's the difference, and how do we know it's real?
So let's start with the noise level in detection, which is true. Depending on how you implemented the solution or what products you bought, right, you're going to get killed with noise, and that's like one of the realities in stocks today. Okay,
Hmm.
one of the most important things to do with detections is not rely on an individual detection. I think it's really critical that you have the ability that the platform has the ability to correlate. So if you take a sequence of events and you create a narrative around that sequence of events, that will give you a far better picture that it is something worth spending time on versus not. Let's take a simple example. Okay, if you've got a command and control event, okay, so somebody is trying to message out to try and get instructions, and that's all that occurs or for a period of time. okay, it's important that clearly somebody's infected, and so they're trying to get something, trying to get some communication going on with some entity outside. But is the sky falling for you really at that point? No, it's not. Versus you could have had a ransomware that's underway, and you can see a set of behaviors that tell you that there's actual real progress around that. Okay. Now, because you're talking about an accumulation of activity, and you find a way to create a narrative out of that that helps you prioritize where you spend your time. And that is very hard to pull off. We talk about AI in the context of detections only. AI in the context of correlation and prioritization is equally critical. It's equally critical. So for us, at Vectra, we don't just talk about, hey, we can apply AI for detections, but really a lot of the value add to the customers is how do you stitch it together, how do you create a narrative around it, how do you prioritize around that, right? And that creates real efficiency for the SOC. Okay.
Yeah.
Then to answer your question on the second part, indeed there's a ton of hype around ML and AI. It's a much abused term nowadays. And so how does a customer know that it works or doesn't work? A couple of things. First and foremost, if you're doing a paper evaluation of a company, I would stare at the company and kind of go, so if you're a vendor pitching me from Palo Alto and I've got an AI-based solution, I'm going to sit and go, okay, that's great. What kind of data scientists do you really have? Can you walk me through the background of these people? I don't need to know everybody. I don't know the names, but tell me what they've done. And then let's talk about how you actually construct your algorithms. And then what do you do to go about doing that? And frankly, what you will learn very often, I'm not saying this is true for Palo Alto, but very often what you learn is it tends to be simple heuristics.
Yeah.
Okay, and you'll pick that up. But you have to double click on that a little bit to understand that. That's the first thing. Have a discussion about data sets. And what do you do with data sets? What do you do with supervised and unsupervised, right? What's your philosophy? So you have to double click on that a little bit to really kind of peel that back and go that I believe, I have reasonable conviction that your ML AI tools have got some depth to them. And then ultimately, and we say this to customers ourselves when we get into an engagement, do a real red team. Forget when it's all said and done. Yes, we want you to believe them, but there is no better evidence than doing a real red team. You'll know very, very fast, right, whether the efficacy is real or is a bunch of garbage.
Got it. So for our listeners, red team exercises are where you simulate attacks on your environment and you start seeing the real detections. And since you know what you're simulating, you can match it with the detections that are coming in. So you know the efficacy of the products that are deployed. And many organizations do that.
I think it's important to not just rely on just internal red team folks, because many companies have internal folks as well. And it's okay, you got them, but getting somebody from the outside to come in, the MITRE framework tends to be a really good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And so to ensure when you look at red team entities, whether it's inside or outside, think about what framework they are utilizing to construct the attacks, and they're complex enough. If you do simple things, my example earlier, it's all command and control. I mean, honestly, it's not that interesting. Any smart attacker knows how to get around that problem. So you got to make sure the right complexity of the attack. MITRE frameworks provide a good way to think about this.
And related to your models comment, very, very true. But what we see, both Ankur and I, we work in the security industry too. I mean, there's not enough supervised data sets available for meaningful detections. So a related question, one, how should one think about from a company perspective, how do you get to that data? And the second thing, do you see as an industry, and I ask this of many people, getting to a point where these data sets will be commonly accessible?
Yeah. First of all, when you think about crafting a detection portfolio, right, for the customer, you got to take into account both supervised and unsupervised machine learning. Because if you just go down the unsupervised path, then you're really building just a simple anomaly detector, and you can get gorgeous graphs and absolutely garbage results out of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really critical that you have both the perspective. The getting your hands on data for supervised machine learning is tough, but if you have a really good relationship with a set of customers, the best data is live data. And you've got to find a way to harness live data without fully revealing, our the secret sauce of Vectra. I would say we've done a really, really good job in harnessing live data to help us. And so here's an analogy that I think, especially if your listeners are from the Bay Area, that they can relate to. If you drive a Tesla, and if you think about how it learns, because it's always learning, when they do updates for you, those updates are based on your driving behaviors. Every single Tesla driver is in some ways a guinea pig. But that means there's a relationship with live data that exists that constantly allows them to improve. I would say we have something similar.
Very cool.
Very cool.
I was listening to Elon's interview on Lex Fridman. He's a great podcaster, and he was talking about, obviously, I mean, Tesla takes the AI/ML to the next level. Like they're using neural links and stuff. And apparently, in order to detect, like as part of the FSD module that he's now selling for like 13K buy now, or if we're going to raise the prices later, is like an order of magnitude reduction in the data sets that they consume to
Yeah.
detect street signs and trees and all that stuff. And the machine's learning by itself. I guess my question, just following up on that, is the amount of data that is required. So you have kind of the NDR, XDR. There are like siloed data lakes, Uber data lake, and we live in a world where, but there's just way too much data. It's just
Yeah.
ginormous amount of data.
Yeah.
How should people think about it? Like, is it, hey, there's an endpoint data lake, network data lake, cloud data lake kind of thing? There are data lake silos, or is there a next gen AI, ML, whatever technology which is not going to require zettabytes of data to detect threats?
One of the biggest fallacies that exist in our business, in the security business, is the notion that more data is better. I can go back to the beginning of Vectra, right? That was a founding principle at the very beginning, which we have now discarded, which
Yeah.
is find a way to collect as much data as you can. That's the best way to find the needle in the haystack. The truth is, it's can you get your hands on the right data? And then do you have a clear notion of what right data means? And if you do, that'll shrink your data set requirements pretty dramatically. Let's stay with network traffic just for a second. The traditional notion was I need the full packet every single time. A lot of companies were either they looked at NetFlow or they were looking at like I just gotta collect the entire traffic and that's how you can go and glean the signal. When the truth is that the signal lies in metadata, which tends to be 1 or 2% of the overall traffic at most. In that example, what is the approach you're going to take? Just collect all the traffic and God knows how much storage you need, and then the means to go sift through that, or do you just rely on 1 or 2%? So what becomes really critical as you think about what data you need, think about the use cases.
Yeah.
You got to be use case driven versus I'm going to find the use case once I have the data, which tends to be what a SIM tends to do very often. That's also one of the challenges with SIMs tends to be that originally started out with giant repository, just collect as much as you can, and then we'll write a bunch of analytics on that, right, to go find the use case that you care about versus the use case dictates what data you're going to collect in the first place.
Yeah, very good. One of the things that you brought up that kind of struck a chord with me was you said, hey, like there was a idea in the founding principles, and you said, hey, like that hasn't stayed true through the test of time. Just the question on that learning is that how do you ensure that the company is not too enamored by the founder CEO's original idea on a mission driven approach, like, oh, we're going to detect the most advanced threat and not being receptive to market and the customers? How do you make sure? How do you pivot?
It's a really good question. I'll tell you in terms of learning experience in our case. If I go back to our Series A deck, the Series A deck said neural networks, bunch of traffic, GPUs. I kid you not. That was the thesis. Okay, so therefore, you got a whole bunch of data.
By the way, Hitesh, that deck today lands a 10 billion round at a trillion valuation.
Sadly, you're right. So I think sadly you're right. Yeah, because exactly. It kind of checks off all the
boxes.
The boxes that everybody cares about right now. So that was the thesis, okay? Which is use advanced AI techniques, or really anomaly techniques. Neural networks. Clearly you need horsepower, so get GPUs. I mean, how else would you do it? And then collect a whole bunch of data, and magic is going to occur. The truth is, what I said earlier, we had like the most beautiful graphs. The results were terrible. Like there was, talk about noise, like noise galore. Okay. The thing, once you have that stark result, there are a couple of things you can do. One is be dogmatic about it and say, no, no, if my algorithms got tuned better, then suddenly it's going to get better. And so two things occurred in our case in particular. It was clear to me that the initial team that was on and chasing this thesis did not have the capacity to look outside of the thesis. So there was a very rapid, let me bring on other people who can break the mold of our thinking and allow us to kind of look outside the box, if you will, right away. The second thing was built early relationship with customers, coming back to the customer thing. Because of the relationship I had over a period of time, predating Vectra, we were able to sit in their environment and coming back to the notion of live data and really prove what's going to work or not work in a live environment as opposed to a theoretical lab environment with a bunch of data.
Love it.
Those two things were key in breaking that mindset. So you've got to have, and the key to that is the people thing, as always, right?
Yeah.
You've got to have the courage and to kind of say, you know what? Okay, you guys are this initial crew that is thinking about this. I appreciate the fact that you are on day zero, but you cannot monopolize the path forward. And if that means, and this is the hardest thing, if that means letting go of a couple of them, then you've got to be able to do that too. And that decision early on is going to determine what path you're going to take. And it's very hard to do. Easy for me to talk about this right now because it's after the fact, but that was a tough set of calls to make early on.
And knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently if you were restarting Vectra?
I think, honestly, maybe some of the people decisions I would have made faster. Probably is the biggest thing I would have done differently. Because, look, the truth is, when we started this out, the whole notion of applying AI ML to any kind of data set to go and find for signals was considered fairly esoteric. When I went up and down Sand Hill looking for funding, people to kind of support us, right? Majority of the people were like, this is really high beta. Just don't do this. You can go and do any number of things. What are the odds this is going to work? And the odds were not terribly high, other than the thesis that it could work. So I couldn't have changed the thesis fundamentally because until the rubber meets the road, you get knocked down a little bit. You don't have enough hindsight to go and say, I want a different thesis. The thesis is good. The practical application and moving fast on making some decisions, that's 2020. But at this point, I would have changed some people's stuff faster.
Got it. I have a quick product question along the same thread. Let's just say, you decided you're going to have this advanced threat detection capability, staying true to that general mission. Customer buys the product. They're like, Hitesh, this is great. In last 1 year, I haven't detected anything. And Hitesh is asking the customers, well, you got to renew. But yeah, like we haven't detected, bad guys haven't entered the market, right? Because nobody got into the house. How do you decide whether to also send signals on if somebody's knocking on the doors versus gotten in as well? I have personally decided, as it pertains to detection, just to show value. Hey, somebody's knocking on the door. You got to pay attention versus, hey, somebody got in, because that somebody got in event doesn't happen that much. And most customers are not ready to do red team exercise. They're like, hey, deploy it. We'll see. If it detects it, great. You've proven your value. Otherwise, you haven't.
In some ways, the whole posture market has kind of emerged out of that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, until I'm a direct beneficiary, I can't. But truly, I mean, you guys know this. I mean, and especially given the background you've got, Ankur, that becomes essential in, helping customers think that, okay, it's not just about whether somebody's in the door. Are you set up correctly to prevent them from getting through the door in the first place?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So you've got to make sure that your tool set has got that baked in. And then frankly, if they're not ready to do a red team, you can make that part of your offering to them.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Okay, they don't have to do it. You can, this is, again, it comes back to how deeply you're engaging the customer. If you've got a regular cadence with them and you are maniacal about customer success and all that, then yes, they will let you come in and do your version of red teams as well and help to highlight the gaps they've got and the need for a detection portfolio. Which, by the way, what you just said, 3-4 years ago, I used to run into that all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Like, what if this doesn't light up like a Christmas tree? Am I really in trouble? Like,
Yeah.
it's a rare customer today who's going to wake up and go, if I don't get anything. In fact, I was talking to a customer yesterday who is a customer, and it was like, I said, so how are we doing? And it was like, well, no news is good news because I don't want to hear from you. I really do not want to hear from you.
Yeah.
That I sleep better at night when I don't get a call.
Yeah. No,
That's the
it's an
world we're living
interesting
in right
point,
now.
and like I've gone 360, and in security will keep going in circles, right? We light up the Christmas tree a little too bright, and they're
Yeah,
like, "Okay, tone it down a little bit, would you?" So
that's
now
right.
you got to discuss
I don't have
that.
the people. I really
Oh,
don't want to report this. This is really hard.
exactly.
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
and then like my pre-sales, like then we dial it down. They're like, "Dude, I can't
that's
do the
not enough.
first time to value. First time to
Yeah,
value. I got to show. You got to light things up." So, anyways, we just wanted to geek out on that product stuff. I'm sure we can spend a lot of time, but I know Nilima, you've got something on the Great Resignation. Go for it.
Yeah. So basically, the next question is, which is very, very hot topic right now, is the great resignation. My LinkedIn is lit up with bye-bye messages. Looks like people have too many choices and too many startups are coming
yeah,
up and they're getting a lot of money in
yeah.
terms of salaries. How do you keep your best people in a climate like this?
This is going to sound pretty obvious, but the culture you have in the company is one of the biggest things that keeps people around. Again, super easy to say. The one of the key things to really being data driven about it, if you will, is do you actually do regular surveys of your employees? Do you actually collect data that backs up the thesis you may have in your head that I have a great culture? Right? It's not enough for me to kind of think here that I've got it. Can I measure it? Can I get feedback from the customer, from our employees that tells me that, okay, by and large, we are trending correctly or we have gone off the rails in the following areas? So that becomes really critical. That's number one. Because ultimately, if it's only about money and that's the only reason they're there, that's going to have a short lifespan. People will take blood money for a period of time, and then at some point they're going to go like, who cares? I'm miserable anyway. I might as well leave. The second thing is you've got to have honest discussions with people, and this is very hard, whether it's the right fit for them and for you. This is true regardless. This is just good practice no matter what. But in this period when you're getting bombarded by new job offers and crazy compensation packages and all, right? Part of the equation that gets missed here is the career. Where are you going with yourself? Okay. And oftentimes if you have an honest discussion with the individuals about their path, it could be that the best place for them to go is not where they are, but go somewhere else. But make it about the career first and foremost, as opposed to just about it's just a bigger title or a better pay package, and ideally you're offering them a far better track internally to get there,
Yeah.
and that should be the reason. So that honest dialogue becomes really critical if you're going to retain people, and then you're going to have a percentage of people who are mercenaries. What are you going to do? They're going to go to the next job offer, and that's just the way it goes.
Yeah. But the one thing I do struggle and wanted to get your point of view is hiring new grads. They really don't understand, well, they do understand theoretically the culture piece, but they have not tasted it. And they are to some extent driven by monetary benefits. Any advice or insights into how to hire them better compared to the
Yeah, look,
experienced
I
people?
think we should not underestimate that even the new grads want to hang around smart people. And we've had very good success fending off large company offers because the people they talk to here, ultimately they're going to, you know what, I want to be around these people. And I want to work with these people. I'm going to learn from them. It's just going to be a great crew to be around. If you have done a good job of having those kind of people in the first place, they will serve as a magnet for the new folks coming out of school, because that plays, in our experience at least, that has played as big a role as whether you're paying them $10,000-$20,000 more or whatever the case may be. But that people aspect becomes really critical.
Very
Yeah.
cool. I have a question along the same lines, but before I ask that question, I want to take a quick detour. A little birdie told me that you had your names all over the word iPhone, or the term. You had a patent of sorts. Tell us a little bit about that, and I'll come back to the question I had.
Yeah, so I not me personally, I did not have the patent to the iPhone. Cisco did.
Okay.
What you're referring to is a startup within Cisco that I led, and we ended up acquiring a company, and the company had the trademark to iPhone. So it was the original device in the house. Broadband was pretty limited. This is now going back to 98,
Yeah.
99,
Early days.
right?
Yeah.
And so that company was bought, had the trademark to iPhone, and it was an experiment. I would say maybe 15, 20 years too early at that time. The right concept. And ultimately, it was Cisco's attempt to be in the consumer business, really. And the premise there was that you could build a set of devices that are broadband connected inside the house, right, to some kind of connectivity from the outside, build a content model, right, where service providers would subsidize that, and the average consumer would end up getting that, and can do much like what we do today do on our devices, phones, and iPads and such. It was think of that as a very early incarnation of that, and then at some point, Cisco, to some arrangement at Apple, ended up giving that the trademark to Apple.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in Cisco 2006, and around that time, like when Apple had to pay up Cisco, and I'm like, holy cow! Like we had iPhone name back in the days. I didn't know you and Charlie were the
No,
man
no,
behind
we
it.
Charlie and I were were
Yeah,
were knee deep into this, and so we actually
yeah,
did that version of the iPad. We had won like the best industrial design award. There's a picture of Chambers that was going to be on the cover of Business Week at that time, right? It was pretty far in. And then at that time, what we were trying to do was to get the new brand of service providers that were in the market that were challenging the incumbents, right, at the time, and they're kind of coming up with new business models. The goal was to use them as a way to break into the market, and then the lights went out. And when the lights went out, that brand of service providers uniformly collapsed. And so once they collapsed, right, the old business model came back and there was retrenched in the market, and we're like, all right, you know what? It's a good idea, but the best thing to do right now is to shoot it and go back to like routing and switching, which is what we did.
yeah, yeah. So here's the reason why I asked this question, right? And because we were talking about people, etc., which is that Cisco had the iPhone, iPad idea. Heck, I mean, Cisco thought about Slack and messaging stuff even before that thing became a thing. And big companies consistently try to experiment this. And Nilima said young people, but young people are drawn to the cool, the sexy, the new thing. But there's something about big companies where kind of entropy builds up. It's not the innovation engine is not there, but over time the cool gets lost. How should the big companies maintain cool, or is there a level of inevitability around
Look,
here
I
where they're
think
just
that's the beauty of what we do here is that there's an endless opportunity for somebody to come along and disrupt.
yeah,
Okay, but there is a lesson in that Cisco story, which, if I were to be candid, I think maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong. I see happening with you guys. Like, for example, how is your consumer business working out?
I must say early days.
Early
Yeah,
Early
days.
days. So that's exactly what I would have told you if you had asked me at that time. How is the consumer
yeah,
business working out? I would have said it's early days. You can make as a large company is to think that every adjacency is available to you. Just because you've got momentum in one sector, you think you can go and do that really well elsewhere. That happens rarely. And if you look at the in the history of enterprise, Microsoft is probably one of the very, very, very few companies, at least that I can think of, that built their business in the commercial enterprise sector and then ultimately found a very dedicated consumer oriented stuff. Yeah, people bought PCs in the house, but it was really with Xbox and others where they really went. And by the way, there was a loss leader for a long time. And maybe a loss leader now, I don't know. But you have to have the capacity to really pour endless money into
yeah,
it to really branch out, right? So even a company like Cisco, who had no shortage of money, found it really, really hard to get into that. But coming back to your question about
yeah,
how do you attract the young people in there, one of the key things that ultimately drives innovation is that are you willing to disrupt your business model?
yeah,
Companies make this mistake all the time where, for example, if you're a box company, a box company is going to struggle to kind of go, I'm willing to cannibalize this revenue stream and go from perpetual to subscription. You can say you're going to do it. The journey is super hard, but the reason that your ability to transition there becomes critical is that it leads to the kind of innovation that attracts folks to come in,
yeah, without a
right?
doubt.
If you can be fairly ruthless about it and have the backbone to go do it, then it's going to lead to innovation. It's going to lead to you attracting the right people. I'll come back to Microsoft as an example. I don't know if people would call Microsoft cool, but today people would say Microsoft is a great company
Yeah,
Yeah.
without question. Before Satya took it over, nobody would have said it's a great company.
Yeah.
But what they've done, what he has done, and the team around him have done is incredible in transforming that into a cloud first company. Where today, if you are coming out of any of the top schools, right, and you land at Microsoft as your first job, and 3 years later you want to leave and go get something else, people are going to look at the resume and go, okay, you're part of Azure. You know what? I want you. Versus whatever it was 10 plus years ago, I joined the Windows group from school, and you go, okay, you're a Microsoft Windows group or whatever. It's like not that interesting.
Totally, yeah. They are in all the hot markets. I mean, you name it, they are there.
But they've been willing to change their model along the way,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
totally.
And then they've been maniacal about it, and that takes courage. It takes real leadership courage to go do that.
It is. I don't think there is a playbook. I mean, books and annals of history have been written on this. I think great leadership is one of the leading indicators. Netflix consistently cannibalized their own old model to get into
Yep.
new stuff. And you talked about Microsoft, but there are only a handful. You can literally count in two hands big companies who got better as they got bigger. It usually doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen. No.
Yeah.
So now pivoting to the investment or the VC market, Vectra raised 130 million last year, middle of last year.
Correct.
And we've never seen so many unicorns in a year raising monster rounds. What do you think happened last year? And do you think the trend will continue this year?
For the next 12, 24 months, right, there's a ton of capital in the market. So I think you can go and raise a good chunk of money and do what you need to get done. If you are one of the people raising money, you want to be really thoughtful about what you're going to do if you go raise $500 million. You can burn $500 million actually quite quickly if you want to and not get the right return on it. So one of the biggest things that is, are you disciplined about the way you're building your business out? You want to go for growth, ideally hyper growth if you can get it. But the thing that you have to keep an eye on is that what are you going to look like, again, in the long game? Are you going to be a sustainable franchise once you go to Wall Street? And because here's the truth. Everybody who goes through this growth period and it's super high, once you get to a certain scale, there's inevitably some kind of slowdown is going to occur. The thinking is, hey, you know what? As we scale, I'm going to get just smarter about how I manage my expenses, and then magically, when the growth slows down, I've just tuned everything just perfectly. And so you're looking for this perfection scenario that never happens. Okay. And so all these people are raising this all this, like, 200 million, 5 million, right? We have raised about 350 right now so far. There's a time when 350 would have been looked like, good God, like $350 million. Now you look at this and go like, man, what's wrong with you? Like, that's it? Like, why don't you go raise another $500 million and go do that? Then the question becomes, what are you going to really do with it? And is it setting you up for a successful public outing? The reality also is that, look, if you look at some of your competitors, whether it is Lacework or Wiz or something, one is going to have a great outcome.
Yeah.
Okay. Only one. You're not going to get 5 people raising that kind of money and they're going to go out there and kill it. You're hoping that you'll be that one, but the smarter way to do this is to be thoughtful about the money you want to raise.
Yeah, playing the long game. I think that's been one of the consistent theme across the interview, whether it's a company, people, culture, or raising money. And couldn't agree more. We can ask a whole bunch of questions just on this thread. We're running short on time. So I'm going to kick us off with rapid fire. It's a quick set of questions, yes or no, 5 questions. You ready for this?
Go for it.
All right, let's go. January 22. So it's prediction time. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions on your predictions. Does Web3 gain steam or lose ground this year?
Can I tell you neither? I think it's got a long way to mature.
Okay. All right. Like it. Is the stock market remaining flat, significantly higher or lower?
I would say for the next 6 months, right, we'll continue inching up. You want me to say yes or no, but stock market, I would have to be an idiot to give you a yes or no. If, interest rates go up significantly, then the market will run into turbulence.
Okay.
It has to.
Okay, this made quite a little bit of thinking. Times person of the year in 2022.
I will tell you the profile of a person. One of the biggest risks we have got here, one of two flavors of people, I would say. If somebody emerges in the United States who can bridge the political divide, I think that person, because that's not just a United States, there's a global implication for that, then I think that person deserves. And the second profile would be if the person, whoever this individual is, if they can find a way to create a better bridge between US, China, and Russia, I would say that would be the other individual that would deserve to be on the cover. Those are the
Got
two
it.
that I would try and go for.
Yep. When pigs can fly, we'll have a no political divide, and we'll have a somebody who can bridge that. But we can be optimistic about the
Yeah, on the
future.
first one, they deserve the
Uh,
Nobel Peace Prize too, by the way, if they can
of
pull that
course
off.
they do. You heard it first on the record. I'm going to give my prediction for the Times Person of the Year. I think it's going to be Vitalik Buterin. I hope Mark Benioff is listening to this podcast. I think he has a big chance with Web3
Why?
NFTs, and Ethereum is going to be such a big where new
Okay.
sets
Okay.
of companies will get built, and he is the original architect. So, is COVID still a pandemic or becomes an endemic at the end of the year?
I would bet it becomes an endemic by the end of the year.
Okay, love it. Biggest technology breakthrough in 22.
Something to do around medicine. It would be in the realm of, I think how the whole mRNA technology that has been used for COVID, right? And what he can do to accelerate vaccines, not just for COVID, but for other areas as well. Like there's stuff out there right now that they're looking at shingles and stuff like that already, right? It can change the game pretty dramatically in shortening the cycle for how vaccines get developed across the board, not just for what's being applied in COVID right now.
I also heard that if you were not in technology, you would have been a nuclear physicist. So next couple questions are actually a little bit longer time horizons. You don't have to be constrained. What's the biggest unsolved mystery in physics that may get solved long enough time horizon?
It's understanding dark matter.
Okay, very cool. And the last question, TikTok got more traffic than Google in 21. Over the next 3 to 5 years, do you think TikTok captures more in ad revenues than Google, or is Google still the dominant player in ads?
Google is still the dominant player,
Right.
easily.
That wraps up the first installment of our season 2. Hitesh, thank you so very much for taking the time. We really enjoyed this conversation. It's already over an hour, and based on how the conversation was going, we could have done it for another hour, but we respect your time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ankur and Neelima, both of you. I appreciate you making me your first conversation this year. It's an honor. I really enjoyed this quite a bit, and I wish you guys the very best as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hitesh.
Thank you for your
All right,
time.
guys. Thank you.